Well, folks, thanks for tuning in today. I've got a special guest with me. I'm talking to Shawn Mckenzie from Sportsnet. How you doing today, Shawn?
All good. Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
All right. So, first question for you: what did you find appealing about this career working as a rinkside host, or just in broadcasting in general when you first went to school?
Yeah, I think I like, for anyone who doesn't know, my dad's been in the business a long time. So I grew up around it from a really young age. And I just say that because I got to see the ins and the outs of it. I think a lot of people see broadcasts and they watch hockey and they see these personalities and they see kind of the final product, but I don't think a lot of people kind of see what goes into getting that final product to air. So I was fortunate enough at a young age to see all the ins and the outs and the work and kind of the process behind getting a broadcast to air, and what these anchors and these reporters and these broadcasters, kind of prep and go through to get a game to air. And my first kind of taste was traveling for the World Juniors and kind of hanging out on TV sets and seeing kind of the behind the camera aspect of it. And I always was intrigued by it. And I thought it was really cool, and kind of the prep and the scripts and seeing them throw ideas around, the planning that went into it. And not only that, but I saw a lot of the travel and kind of the lifestyle away from the rink, that was the camaraderie. And it almost is in a lot of ways a team, a broadcast team that's much like a hockey team or a lacrosse team, football team, basketball team. It's a close-knit group that spends a lot of time together and then goes out and performs. So I think for me, that was kind of the really cool aspect of it that I saw, was it felt like you were a part of a team, or at least it looked like those guys were. And there's so much respect for one another, and almost like the accomplishment of it too. When they have a really good show, you can tell that there's a certain energy, and when it's a bad show, you can tell that they want to strive to be better. So I think I saw from an early age that aspect of it, which always really intrigued me. And then the more and more I got into it, the more I thought, this is really cool. And then the nerves and the energy, and you kind of know what it feels like when the camera goes on and you're live, or you're about to record a take, and you're kind of nervous, and then you nail it and it's exciting, or you flub it and you go, crap, I got to get so much better next time. It's like, just like any athlete, and it's not, not comparing ourselves to athletes, because what they do is so much more physically demanding and way more on the line. But there is that sense of getting better and perfection and constantly trying to improve. So I think for me, that's what originally appealed to it. And that's what keeps me going now, is kind of that sports mentality that you got to always be getting better. You got to always be, giving it your best.
For those that don't know, Shawn's dad is, of course, Bob Mckenzie from TSN. And I will get back to him in a moment, Shawn, because obviously you've probably had a lot of questions about your dad's career. So we want to stick with you just for a moment here. So what do you enjoy most about what you currently do at Sportsnet?
I kind of touched on it a little bit there, but I love being in the rink. I love, going to school and growing up. You never knew exactly which aspect of it you wanted to do. And then as you go to school, you get to try out all the different elements. And then even within Sportsnet, you start doing some anchoring, on the update desk. You start by doing some general reporting, and then all of a sudden you get the opportunity to host a game. And I think all of that was amazing. But I think that first game that I ever hosted, the feeling when they're counting you down to do your broadcast opening, which, most of your live hits when you start out are, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, or 15 seconds throwing to clips. And then all of a sudden, you're doing your first live broadcast, like you would do on a hockey night, or you would do on a Wednesday night Leafs game, or even, any regional game. Like I started out doing regional Senators. But I think that feeling when the producer's in your ear and you have a minute 20 to fill, and you got to talk over 3 graphics, and it comes in and live shots. And, my first ever broadcast, the band was warming up next to me for the national anthem. And you're literally like, what did I get myself into? Like, that was the most terrifying moment ever. But then you do it, and, looking back, it's probably, no good at all. But, in the moment, you don't flub anything, and you get through it, what you think is perfect, and you think you do a good job. And, the rush and the high of being like, holy crap, I just did that. It's addictive. So I think for me, that's kind of the most fun part. But then, there's, again, like I mentioned before, the team aspect of it is, all day you're working with producers, and you're working with, the other broadcasters on the thing, the play-by-play, the color, the director, the audio people. You go into the truck and you plan your opening with them, and you kind of go through it and break it all down. So I think, you go through all that, you plan it, you execute it, and then afterwards you might go out for a beer or, a nice meal. And so I think it's the excitement of the game, being in the rink, the live atmosphere, and then kind of I don't want to say celebratory because you're not celebrating every game like you accomplish something, but I think just the come down is like, okay, let's go to the lobby bar and have a quick bite or something and talk about the game. I think it's that, camaraderie and the excitement of just being in the rink every day.
Out of all the games you've been able to cover so far, including the Stanley Cup playoffs, what are some of the highlight games that have stood out to you so far?
I'm trying to think. My first hockey night Leafs game is one of those. That's more of a personal reason than anything. It was just an average game probably for most fans, but I remember it was a back-to-back. The Leafs played Friday night in Carolina. And I often don't do, I've only done a handful in my life of the Leafs Saturday night games. I usually do the Habs or the Sens Saturday nights. And at the time I was doing a handful of the Leafs regionals, I believe it was. So I'm trying to think. I can't remember the exact layout of it, but I believe the Leafs were in Carolina the night before, and it was a TSN game. So I was just doing more of the news element of it. And Saturday night they were in Boston. I believe Christine Simpson came down sick or something. It was so long ago that I know that she was unavailable, and it was a kind of bit of an emergency situation. And so they phoned and said, "Do you want to do Saturday night?" And it wasn't even a question. Like, of course I want to do Saturday night, but it's back to back, so it's so quick of a turnaround that we flew in the next day, and our hotel wasn't ready, and you have to be at the rink for broadcast at 3:30, and the hotel wasn't ready at 3. So I'm sitting there in the lobby, not really showered from the plane. I finally get my hotel room. I have 15 minutes to put a suit on, rush to the rink, get ready, and it just felt like such a whirlwind. But then, like I said, that feeling when I got to my 30-second opening, taken from Ron McLean in Boston for a Leafs game, you're like, holy, that was the coolest feeling ever. It just felt like, wow, this is kind of a dream come true to thank Ron and then throw it back and, to look back and the Maple Leafs are playing at TD Garden. It's kind of in your own mind, a pretty big milestone. That was one of them. A lot of just covering I was doing more the news aspect than the broadcast, but being in the building, I covered a handful of Stanley Cups. I did 3 Cup Finals in a row. So being in Chicago, going out into the ice when, you're interviewing guys 10 minutes after they won the cup, stuff like that's cool. First day of playoffs was always cool in Toronto, the first playoff series I covered, because, you go to Maple Leaf Square and I get to do a lot of the stuff with the fans. And that one's always cool because you get to feel the energy, and just goes back to that same feeling of being, live on TV with, the fans around and the music pumping. I think those are always cool. You
mentioned covering the Stanley Cup. You've been able to work with Chris Johnston on some of those. And how's that been working with Chris? How much have you enjoyed working with him?
I love working with CJ because we do right from the day basically I broke into covering Leafs, which was 5 years ago, to now. We do, we call them chats. You might have seen them on the web. You might have seen them on intermissions of broadcasts. Basically I just hit them with questions. We do 2 a day on game days, not including the live ones. We do 1 after every practice. So we've probably done 1,000 chats. So we always have fun. And, I always ask him, what do you want to talk about? And he's like, what do you want to ask me? So we always have a fun back and forth. And, sometimes you're under such a deadline that we call it surprise the siege, where, he's such a professional that, he will have a million topics. And sometimes I'll just hit him with, rapid fire questions that he doesn't know the exact ins and outs of what the question's going to be, but he's always prepared. And he almost kind of likes it, I think, because, it becomes more of a natural answer. But I love working with him because he's always so prepared. He's always so ready to go that we can kind of do that stuff that even if it's a hectic day or it's a crazy moment, I know that, if I have a question prepared for him, he can knock the answer out of the park. So it doesn't take a whole lot of prep. It can be more reactionary. And he's a fun guy to be around, to travel with. He's easygoing. I think that's the key, is when you spend that much time working with someone and you're traveling and you're, 5 a.m. flights, checking into hotels, checking out of hotels, rushing to the rink, to have someone that's pretty low key and pretty relaxed is nice. Because I think once the stress starts to go high, then the product can maybe fall apart at times. But I think we're both pretty low stress, so it works.
What's the best piece of advice you've gotten so far since you've been working at Sportsnet?
Early on, I think the best was it's not as bad as you think, and it's not as good. So when you screw something up, in the moment, and it's a hard feeling to explain to people who have never done TV, but like you could do a perfect hit, but in your mind, sometimes like you feel like you panic because you might have forgot something. Like, because I know that I don't memorize every word, but I have an idea of where I'm going to go. And there's sometimes when you're going through it and you're live, and all of a sudden your brain goes blank, and you're like, oh, where am I going? Where am I going? And you think it's this long 10-second pause where you look like an idiot on TV, but you spit it out, and then you watch it back and you're like, oh, that didn't look bad at all. That was great. Like, what felt like an awkwardly long pause actually looked natural on TV. So I think it's not as bad as it looks, but then sometimes you think you nailed this hit, and you're going, oh, that was amazing. And then you watch it back and you're like, oh, I flubbed that word, or I got a stat. Like, I think it's just the highs and the lows. Is TV is deceiving. Sometimes you think you nail it, you watch it back and you go, wow, that wasn't very good at all. Or sometimes you think you really sucked and it was actually good. So I think just it comes down to what a lot of hockey players say is you can't ride the highs too high and the lows too low. Is, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's bad. Usually it's just kind of in that middle ground.
So with your dad obviously being a great role model for you, I'm just curious, what is it about the following that he's had that's made so many people want to follow him so closely for so long?
I think for me, it's always been, because it's funny, because it's when you look around at broadcasters, and it's just the way it is. It's broadcasters, it's athletes, it's anyone in the public eye. There's usually, it's sometimes a 50-50 split, sometimes more, sometimes, 70-30 of people that really love them and really hate them. Like, and as it usually should be, because TV is very polarizing, athletes are polarizing, but he seems to have, you go on Twitter anytime he tweets, and there's never usually a lot of negative feedback. It's usually people that always show a lot of respect to him and a lot of, almost gratitude or kindness. And, they seem to really appreciate him. And I think for me, and there could be way more to it, but I think that comes from the fact that he's not really an opinion-driven guy so much. He's not a guy that, in this day and age, a lot of people throw hot takes around, and we see it a lot in American TV. And I'm not knocking, because I love it. Like, I love watching First Take and all those kind of Stephen A. Smith type shows where they're yelling and screaming and half the takes don't even make sense. And you're like, that's wrong, but you love it because, and that's what I mean by polarizing people. But I don't think he's like that at all, because I think he relies on info. I think his biggest attribute is he has information and he breaks news, and he has info that other people that they don't have. So I think as long as you have that, which is a very, very hard thing in this business to do, because, how often do you get a piece of information that no one else has? It's very, very rare. And I think it takes years and years and years of building up contacts. So I think for that aspect, he gets a lot of respect and a huge following, because his information, first of all, is almost always accurate. Like, he really works hard to make sure. And there's a lot of great insiders like Elliot Friedman who are the exact same way, that when you see their info on Twitter, you can rely on it. There's no guesswork. There's no going, oh, well, maybe he's right, we'll have to wait to see someone else. Like, when those guys confirm that type of information, it's huge. And that's why they have so many followers, because, there's a lot of people with personalities that have following, but some people love those personalities, some people hate them, but you can't really hate or love information, right? It's either accurate or it's not. So I think that's why he's so respected. And same with guys like Elliot, where, if your information's good and you're constantly bringing it, what can you hate? You're bringing accurate information to people, which is, I think, probably one of the hardest things in this business to do. Coming up with a hot take is easy. It's hard to make it entertaining, but finding out true, accurate information on a deadline, I think, is probably one of the hardest, most, well-respected things to do in this business.
Well, that's just it. I mean, your dad doesn't come off as a really flashy guy.
No.
He just comes across as somebody that's like, your dad's best friend or your neighbor. And
Yeah.
if you saw a picture of my dad, my dad always reminded me of yours. So I'll have to show you that.
And I think that's why people love the whole Bobby Margarita thing, is because, you never get much of a peek behind the curtain, or you never really have, because his Twitter is simply that. It's info, right? It's, I've spoke to this agent, or this GM says this, or here's a trade, or this bit of news is coming from the league, where you see a little bit of what he's like, and then all of a sudden, as he's gotten older, I think he's done more fun stuff, and you get kind of a peek behind the personality. Then I think people start going, okay, this is great, because he's always been this guy who's given us info, this trustworthy, reliable guy, like you said, like a neighbor or someone who just, you rely on. Now all of a sudden he's giving you a little bit more, this is what I do at my daily. And I think that's like any real personality is, people want to see more and more and more and more. And I think that's why he's having a little bit more fun with it.
How have you been able to take the example that he set for you as a broadcaster in order to help build relationships and trust with players, GMs, anybody that you're interviewing?
That's a good question, because I don't think it's, people, everyone always, it's, and I get a lot of it where, and it's no fault to these people, or, because it's an easy comment to make and it's a funny one, but like, when he retires, you're the next insider, you're going to get his cell phone Rolodex. Well, like, what people don't understand is all the numbers of players, and well, maybe not players is a bit different, but agents, GMs, staff, you can get those numbers. Like, I could text someone right now and say, hey, give me the number of Sidney Crosby's agent or Austin Matthews' agent. Like, we know these guys from the rink, we see them all the time. Having the number isn't the hard part, that's the easy part. It's like, I could give you the number of a movie star. Are they going to pick up when you text them or phone them? No. Like, that's the battle, right? Is, you can have the phone number of someone, but actually phoning them and getting them to take your call and answer and, give you some information, that's the really impossible part. So I think for those guys, seeing how my dad grew up and how he got the trust of people, and, how fragile it is, I think, in a lot of ways, where, you only really have one chance to get that relationship or start that relationship and then build on it. I think I kind of learned that from seeing, how he handled it and how a lot of guys in his position did, where, you only get maybe to meet these guys once every couple months, or you might, you get to see one team every few weeks or even more. So I think you have limited time to make these relationships, but I think kind of seeing how guys like him and Elliot and, guys like Chris Johnston, who have been doing this for a long time, how they kind of tread that line of being professional while still building a relationship. It's not easy. And I think that's maybe the thing that gets taken them granted most, is how hard it is for these guys to build those relationships and earn that trust. So I think it's just, it's a very slow process, but I think I saw it firsthand from a really young age, how to treat certain people with respect and how not to treat certain people, because you hear stories about this guy or that guy. So I think you kind of just piece together what it takes to be kind of a respected person in this business.
Who's somebody that you haven't interviewed yet in any sport that you would like to?
Ooh, that's a good one. I've always been interested in LeBron, because just the way he seems to think and answer questions is so, I love guys like that when you ask them a question and they seem to stop and go, and like, they don't just give you a generic answer, but, and I say LeBron because, and I'm talking like a one-on-one sit-down interview, you actually get to talk to a guy, because those don't happen with guys that big. Like, anytime LeBron comes to Toronto, you get to see there's like 50 people trying to scramble into a scrum. So I think if you ever got the chance to actually talk, and like he's a big wine guy, and I love wine. So I think I'd more so enjoy just talking to him about that aspect of life and kind of those type of things. But he's always been a really intriguing one, just because I don't get to cover basketball at all. So someone that's that big and that famous and that influential, I think would be cool to, have a chat with and, ask a few questions. Hockey wise, we get to basically interview everyone and anyone, just comes with the territory. And, like I interviewed Gretzky a few times at an outdoor pond hockey championship. Like, so stuff like that. I think hockey's more accessible in that sense. At least it feels like that for me, because I'm around the game so much. And I think it does feel a little bit more, there's not as much media. It's not as crazy as maybe the NFL or the NBA. Like, Sidney Crosby, you can go up to in a stall and chat with. Like, I don't know how many times throughout the course of the year, if I need a question for Sidney Crosby, I'll just walk up to him when he's done doing his skates. Hey, Sid, and this, how do you like your stick? Why do you do this? Like, whereas if I covered the NFL and I tried to go up and talk to Tom Brady, like, you're not getting the time of the day, not against him, but because there's so many other media, PR people. So I think those elite athletes like that, I think would be cool to talk to.
It's interesting because I talked to Kyle Bukauskas last week, and he had the very same answer, which which was LeBron James. Did you find a big difference between covering, your average hockey night in Canada game on a Saturday, which is still a big deal for a broadcaster, but from that and then going to the Stanley Cup Finals and covering those?
It's very different. It might be a little inside baseball to try to explain, because we have different departments. We have broadcast and news, where broadcast would be like when I'm doing a Leafs game, or let's say I'm doing a Saturday night Habs game, and I take it to and from Ron, and then I'm in the building and I'm giving in-game stories throughout the course of the game, and then I'm doing the intermission interviews, and that is more of the broadcast side, which is much more game involved and game driven and more live content. And then there's the news side, which consists of more covering the morning skate. You cover the morning skate. We, a lot of time we do both, but when I do playoffs, especially at Stanley Cup level, our real top end people like Scott Oak would be the rinkside guy for the Cup final. So we do more the news side, which is still an amazing thing to do, but it's much more morning skate interviews. You watch the game from the press box, then you go down to the dressing room after. So it's like comparing apples and oranges in that sense, where it's not as exciting from a work perspective to cover a Stanley Cup final versus a Leafs game, news versus broadcast, because you're not at ice level. You're not welcoming everyone into the building. It's much more, you're up in the press box with popcorn, sitting kind of watching, waiting, coming up with storylines for post game. But as far as the straight atmosphere in the building, yeah. And you catch yourself sometimes more going like, you watch so many hockey games throughout the course of the year. When you're watching a Tuesday night game between the Leafs and the Panthers, in November, part of you's kind of like, okay, yeah, goal, cool, great goal, nice. But then when you get to the Cup final, the playoffs, it's like everyone in the building is hanging on every pass, every penalty, every moment, where then you start feeling like, this is intense, this is crazy. And then you also catch yourself going, wow, like I'm watching the Stanley Cup final and I'm getting paid to do it. Like I'm here for work. Like this is really cool. So in that sense, when you strip away the actual role and what you're doing there, there's a much more intense feeling. You feel like every report you do, every item you do, you really got to make it count. And that's more of a personal thing than anything. But I think just like hockey players that up their level in the playoffs, I think broadcasters feel they should as well, right? Because the stakes are higher. You want to tell better stories. You want to, really capture the moment. So I think you almost, in that sense, get a little more excited. So yeah, it's more exciting. It's more impactful. I think everyone's around. The top media people are there. It's the two top teams. The scrums are bigger. The nerves are a little bit more when you go into a dressing room, because for that series, Sidney Crosby would come out and speak once a day, and there was 30 cameras and 30 media people, and you better have a good position in that scrum or you're going to get boxed out. And that's our version of the game, right? Where you need to get a good placement. You need to try to get your question in. You need to have a couple of good questions prepped. So I think the nerves and the reality of the situation you're in ratchets up, just like it does probably for the players. It feels a little bit more on edge.
Who has surprised you as being one of the more enjoyable athletes to talk to so far for you?
Oh, that's a good question. There's a lot, most are really, really good guys, like just genuinely good people that you can go up to and chat with. And because the role of, the broadcast side, the news side is, you have the camera in their face, you got the microphone, you're asking them questions that are going to go to air in a couple hours, and maybe they're about the power play or line changes or this and that. But then there's the broadcast element where, for example, I did a story, felt like a long time ago because we haven't covered hockey in a long time, but when the Dallas Stars were in town, about Tyler Seguin's new Ford GT, which is like an insane sports car that he waited 2 years to get. So you don't really want to ask him that question with a camera in his face, with a microphone, with 10 other reporters around, because if he doesn't want to answer the question, you put him in a really bad spot, because then it's on air, it's live, not necessarily live, but anything that gets caught on those cameras is accessible for us to use. So he doesn't want to answer the question and look like he's showing off that he got this new crazy car, because, he's a humble guy who just wants to, he posts on Instagram and he wants it to be cool for his fans, but he doesn't want to then go talk about it. So you have to then have the relationship to go up afterwards and say, hey, Tyler, can I talk to you alone? Which isn't always easy because the PR people kind of rush you in and out sometimes. And, and then you get the relationship to be like, okay, tell me a little bit about it. Give me the info that you want out there. So I think that is, the difference between talking to guys as a broadcaster versus sometimes just on the news side. So I think there's different ways about it, but I think he's always a fun guy to talk to. Chara is always really interesting. For me, the funny one is Brad Marchand, because everyone loves to hate him and they think but then you talk to him and he's kind of this really nice intellectual guy who's got some really interesting thoughts on the game, and he jokes with you, and he's the same type of guy. He pokes and prods and has fun, but I think he's not, people want to label him as a bad guy and he's a horrible human being. Well, no, he's playing a game and he's doing it the best he can, and he's using certain ways to be successful, but off the ice, he's actually a pretty cool guy. Crosby's amazing. I don't think I have to tell many people that, but just behind the scenes, he keeps a lot guarded and he's close. He doesn't say a lot, but then when you talk to him, he sits at his stall for an hour and will take questions about anything. He'll talk lacrosse. He'll talk different sports. He'll talk city, like what restaurant you like. So I think there's so many. I'm not giving you one good answer, I know, sorry, but I think there's so many guys that are really unique and interesting to talk to. Jason Spetz is another one who is into cars and fashion and wine, and these guys have a lot of personality that if you just can relate to them a little bit, they sometimes go, oh yeah, like I like that too, and then you can get to talking about something that isn't power play percentage and face-offs and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that is interesting if you ask me, and I don't think everyone has the same opinion about Brad Marchand, so it's good to hear that. It's good to hear that he has a good side to him. So that's
yeah, and he's for us, and that's why I laugh. For media, he's amazing. And so many media people rip him, but I'm like, he's the gift that keeps giving. He gives great answers in scrums. He gives us constant storylines on the ice, and this whole theory of and I get why fans hate players like that, but it's it's sports is entertainment. If everyone was boring and perfectly buttoned down, you need villains, you need good guys, you need people to hate. And it's you go on Twitter and these grown men are fighting each other and, sometimes physically fighting each other in rinks because of a certain allegiance, but it's like wrestling. It's real wrestling. You need people that fire you up. You need people to love. You need the good guy, the bad guy, villains, hate. Hate makes the world go round in sports. It's awesome.
If you had the chance to only work in one arena for the rest of your career, what would it be and why?
Ooh. It's hard because there's so many different aspects of each arena you want to take. One arena. So for straight, when I lived in Winnipeg, that was just going to that building, a Tuesday night game that meant nothing was felt like playoffs. It was insane. I love covering games in Toronto, not so much I think the atmosphere inside isn't as bad as everyone says. It's not a top one in the league. It's not crazy loud. It's not, it is what it is. But I think the atmosphere around the city going into a game is unmatched. I think you walk, Maple Leaf Square and you feel the atmosphere in the bars and the restaurants, and the fans are everywhere, and Maple Leaf Square is going. I cover a lot of games in the Bell Center, which is just ridiculous. A big meaningful game. But I'm trying to think. Maybe the Madhouse, maybe Chicago. United Center is pretty special. The first time I ever heard the anthem was for a Game 7 playoff game against Detroit. I was in my first year covering playoffs, and they sing the anthem. They're so loud. It was my first moment where I was like, holy crap, this is a cool feeling. So I think, you give me Chicago 9 times out of 10 and I'll take that building.
Your dad mentioned years ago that he used to have a VHS player in the car.
Oh yeah.
And on repeat, you guys would watch Ace Ventura. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The best detail about the old VHS player was we had one of those big vans like most hockey parents had, and the VHS, it was the VHS player with the TV built in, like the little, like, you know, it was almost like a cube and had the VHS thing on the bottom, but it never stood up. It looked too like straight to the back. So you needed it on a bit of an angle because it was on the floor. So we used those old neon green Coho goalie pads, the road hockey pads. So you folded two of those in like a wedge and then you put it underneath. But oftentimes it would shoot out and you need to put the pad back in and then the TV, and you had to have the perfect setup with the Coho pads.
What was it about Ace Ventura? I'm kind of biased here because I'm just a huge Jim Carrey fan. So I got to know, what was it about Ace Ventura that made you want to watch it over and over again?
Oh, it's just, you're a young kid and it's the most ridiculous humor ever. What isn't there to like? Like, it's just, you know, when that first came out, like, it was just insane. All of them were, and it was just repeatable line after repeatable line. It's like, you know, like, it's like when you get into your teens, like Superbad and Old School and all these movies now that, you know, as you get older, you quote. Then there was The Mask. I think just in that era, it was that series of movies that were so funny. Like, you know, then it became Austin Powers. I think it was just that humor that as a young kid, it was kind of rude. It was kind of like, oh, we're watching something that maybe we shouldn't. It was kind of dumb. It was funny. It was, you know, Jim Carrey at its finest. And I think you just quote it constantly. So then you just put it back on. And I'm sure we were quiet while watching it. So my dad was like, perfect. It shuts them up and, you know, it's all good.
You mentioned wrestling not too long ago. I looked at your name compared to Shane McMahon. Shane was called Shane O'Mac. Has anyone ever called you Shawn O'Mac?
Yeah, I get Sean. I get that. Sean or Macker. A lot of just like the classic hockey variations on Mac. Well, it's funny because Zach Hyman is one of the nicest guys ever in the league and to cover. And so whenever I do bench interviews, there was a stretch there where he was like, thanks. You know, most guys, you know, it's a funny thing in broadcasting when a guy thanks you and uses your name. It's kind of a sign of like, first of all, he knows who you are, which is first and foremost the important thing. And then some guys, you know, take the time to say, oh, thanks, Sean, or thanks, Andrew, or, you know, they, you know, give a little bit. But he, you know, he once said like, thanks, Macker, which no one really calls me Macker, but it's just a hockey player thing to do, right? And then the next time it's thanks, Mac. And he's put a few different variations on it. I just laugh. It's such a hockey player thing to do. It's like anyone with MC in their name, you're immediately Mac or Macker or something like that. So I got a pretty good laugh out of that.
Who has the best hair in broadcasting not named Kyle Bukauskas?
Best hair. I think it goes to Gene Principe. It's so unique. It's like the perfectly curled. It's always great. It's long, but manic. Like, not many people in broadcasting can pull off the long hair look and it be a look. And Gene's he's got the curls. It's like the old Joe Sakic wet but dry look. It's perfect. It's I gotta give it to Gene.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time today, Shawn. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you back at rinkside much sooner than later.
Yeah, just everyone stay safe, stay happy, and hopefully sooner than later we'll be off these Zoom calls and we'll be watching some real hockey, and hopefully I'll be back in the ring soon enough. Andrew, thanks for having me on, man.
Thank you, Shawn. That's, again, Shawn Mckenzie from Sportsnet.